Welcome, friends, to this broadcast today on Memorial Day here in the United States. I'm delighted to be here, and I thought it'd be good for us to begin with a simple attunement as we usually do. So find yourself in a comfortable posture where you can let your body settle and give your full attention to being here in this moment and receiving this teaching. So bring your awareness firstly to the breath and feel as if you're welcomed by each inhale that you take. That the in-breath invites you to draw inwards, to simply be here. And your own exhale invites you to let go. So feel the body tension, wherever you're aware of it, could just melt. Like ice will melt when it's contacted by the sun's warmth. And feel yourself naturally drawing inwards to the very center of your being, where love always is, where peace is always present. And recognize that you are completely welcomed exactly as you are. That you are welcomed by forces even that your mind might not understand. And feel not only that presence with you, but feel my presence with you. Welcoming you with all the themes that you're grappling with in your life at this moment. Letting everything be here, be included, be welcomed. In your own way, just say a name of the divine that your heart loves best. Whether that's a name of God or a mantra like Om Namah Shivaya, or simply the word truth. And feel the love in your heart for God, for the truth, for what really is. And in this moment, let yourself really feel how important the divine is to you. And as each breath comes in, feel that love within your heart that wants to remember and be close to the felt sense of that truth. Be deepened, just like oxygen fans the flame of a fire. Feel that true desire within your heart to remember and to abide in the source of your being. And recognize that you are given everything you need to live the way of grace, and that you want that. And so remember that as you're listening to this, you're listening with others, that we're here together. And just consider everyone who's listening to this invitation that I'm giving right now. And let yourself feel the support of our togetherness. Opening your heart to that support. The recognition that you're not alone in your devotion, in your dedication. And recognize all the unseen, subtle forces and enlightened beings who are always here to help expand and amplify and bless any practice that we engage in. And just receive the blessings like you receive the light of the sun that makes each day. So I want to share with you a quote that comes from a great Sufi master whose name I will surely mispronounce. It was Abu Sa'id ibn Khail. And he said this really beautiful passage that I want to share something about in this broadcast today. He said, "The true person of God sits with his or her fellow beings and rises and eats and buys and sells and gives and takes, and yet never forgets God even for a single moment." I don't know about you, but that's a quote that is very dear to my heart because it speaks of a very important truth that we can be going about an ordinary human life, whether that involves taking care of family members or working or, journeying in particular communities or dedicating ourselves to a particular kind of work. We can be going to the grocery store. We can be just going about our ordinary business. And yet it's possible for all of that ordinary activity to happen from a place inside of us that is remembering the divine. Remembering the divine, meaning that we are awake to the fact that really there's nothing but God, that every being and everything that exists is a manifestation of the one divine fabric of being. And therefore, God is everywhere, grace is everywhere, blessings are everywhere. The clarity, the gifts we need to live a meaningful life are here. And I know that you want that. I want that for you. And when we recognize this truth, whether it's a truth that I've just mentioned of the fact that there's nothing but God, ultimately, it's all grace, it's all divine, that helps us so much to relax. It helps us to find meaning, whatever's going on. It helps us to trust. It helps us to let go of judgment and fear and some of those habits that can really blight our experience of life significantly. And you might have had moments where this was real for you, where the gates of your consciousness opened, perhaps through reading my book or listening to one of the audios or videos or being exposed to some important truth, maybe that just bubbled up in a moment of inspiration. And you get it. Your heart understands the deeper truth of things. So when we have these moments of grace, of realization, it feels in those moments like all our problems are dissolved. We feel the connection, the truth, the meaning, the fear drops away. We're at peace. And in those moments of grace, it can so easily seem like everything's very simple. We have the answer. We have the key to living a real life. And we do. That is actually true. But often it can be a little bit like the first flush of a romance in an intimate relationship, where it feels in those moments you couldn't possibly ever have an argument with that person or find them irritating. And yet, very easily, things can change. So this is the key often. It's one thing to have moments of grace and to really understand deeply what is, who is, to have those non-dual moments of experience. But to really live them is a whole other path. And for that, we need remembrance. We need to work with our resistance. We need to go a lot deeper. So how does that happen? How do we truly deepen? How do we really live into remembering God, remembering who and what we are, and applying that as we walk through the ordinariness of our lives moment to moment? This is a very big task, and it's not something that I will be able to give all the answers to in one short broadcast. But I want to say something about it today in terms of one of the primary things that we often don't see, which is our own resistance in the mix. When we really start rolling up our sleeves and engaging spiritual practice, when you start really applying ego relaxation, what you will probably find is how much you resist it, how entrenched you can be in your patterns and habits, what is called in the East our vasanas, our tendencies of mind. And it can be very humbling to recognize how we might be praying and meditating and inquiring, but yet so actively getting in the way, so actively resisting the force that we're praying to, resisting the blessings that are always trying to expand and grow us. Why is this so? Well, you might have noticed once you've really started to sit deeply with this transmission of ego relaxation that I've shared with you many times: to be nothing, do nothing, get nothing, become nothing, seek for nothing, relinquish nothing, be as you are, rest in God. You might start to see that the ego has its own kind of mantra that is counter to that. It goes something like this: be more, get more, become more, seek for more, relinquish more. Now that you're on a spiritual path, you've got to do it more, and try harder. There is no rest. You will notice that this is the ego's guidance always. And this is really the primary engines of our world that's so externally oriented. This is what we hear coming through our news channels. This is what we hear coming through social media often. This is the hypnotic trance, the pulse, the metronome of our modern world, thinking that if we do more, get more, become more, seek for more, even get more enlightened, then finally the prize that we want might come to us. But yet you've probably seen that that's such a trap. It doesn't work. And it just keeps us in the search, in the chase, to even become a more spiritually enlightened version of who we think we should be. And so often our superego, the judgmental outer layer of our ego, can get involved in the spiritual awakening process, can even listen to my teachings and, push harder, or sort of be lacking in compassion with ourselves when we start to see there's something that isn't yet free, or some obstacle that we're tripping up on, or that our body is dealing with some illness. And one of the questions, I think it was from Nick, who spoke about the difficulty we can have when our body isn't well, and when we're doing everything right, it seems, and things aren't changing. Our superego can grab hold of that and use it as evidence that somehow we're not doing it right spiritually. Well, my invitation is more to remember first that the next level of deepening, of remembrance, of really living grace always starts with a deeper practice of ego relaxation. And that means being right where you are, right here, even though physical illness might be here, even though someone we love might have died, and we're dealing with the inevitable, powerful emotions of grief blowing through our soul. Even when, as Janet said, we might find ourselves seemingly stuck and not knowing how to move forward, we need to begin any quandary that we have, deepening into that by deepening our practice of ego relaxation. Now, this is subtle because you can't push ego relaxation any more than you can just relax when you're really tense. So what happens is we need to soften right where we are. We need to stop rejecting whatever is here. We need to just allow space to be as we are with whatever is here. And when we can just be right here now with this, we have a platform to be open to the grace that's trying to help us, trying to grow us, trying to bring us something new, trying to bring us into deeper embodiment with whatever the situations that we're dealing with. And that also includes some of the challenges that we see in our world and some of the emotional reactions we might be having about that, how we might be getting really triggered by what we're seeing in the news or what's going on with other people. And so we must stay deep and faithful with this practice of ego relaxation and really take it seriously. A dear friend of mine was asking me very innocently when I was on the road in Europe. We were driving to go and give a talk at Dublin. And she asked me, "What are you looking forward to when you go home?" That was an innocent enough question. But I noticed that the question itself felt like a temptation for me to betray what I know to be most important, which is to stay here now, to really be in the present moment, so that I can be awake to the presence that is living me in each present moment. So I know, for example, when I'm really busy, when I've got a lot on, when my schedule's really full, as it seems to be these days, the only way that I can be relaxed and graceful and peaceful is to not abandon myself into thinking, to not start thinking about tomorrow or the next week or the things I might be looking forward to, but to sense more deeply into the blessing and into the beauty and the truth and the freshness of whatever life is serving in this very moment, and to deepen into that. Because I know in my heart that if I relax and remember God by being present deeply to the sensations of the now, to the sights of the now, to the subtlety of the now, then I have a platform where there is infinite peace, where there's infinite clarity, where the precise answers that are needed for this moment are always here. But I have to be here. And so this is very similar to what we see in the Abrahamic traditions in the Ten Commandments, in the first and the second commandment. The first commandment goes something like to, to have no other gods before me, which really means to place God in the very center of your heart, of your mind, of your focus in each moment, to really be obedient to that focus at all times. Now, that requires a certain recognition in you that when you do that, when the most important thing to you is remembering the oneness, is remembering God always is, there's nothing but God, there's nothing but that which birthed you, which is living everything. Everything you see is divine being. Every emotion is made up of divine being. And even the things that aren't so pretty or easy to see, they're made up of the same molecules of God as you and I are. And that which is seeing through your eyes is the divine. When you remember that, there's so much more possibility to really respond appropriately, to be joyful with whatever's going on. So to really remember the divine in everything invites us to be that present. And only in being present can we be awake to presence, the felt experiential realization of what is always with you, of the peace that passeth all understanding, and the possibility for grace here and now. So there are many things that can really get in the way, can really obscure you and I living that. So we want to really explore what that is for you. So usually when we find ourselves getting lost or getting swept away in our emotions, or forgetting what it is that we truly know in our deepest heart, forgetting the insights that have come in those moments of grace and applying them to our particular situation in life, what it really requires is a deeper curiosity to do in it with our own self-forgetting. So that's really what I'm inviting you to today, to take a closer look at your resistance, at your self-forgetting, and to look at that without the superego. Some of you may not be so familiar with that term, but if you've read my book, then I wrote a chapter, it's chapter 4, called Dropping the Knife of Judgment. And it's a really important chapter to study because it's really showing how our superego, which is the outer layer of our ego structure, which is really the ego's form of guidance, how that works and how that inhibits you from truly looking more substantially at the things that you need to look at, and doing so with kindness and compassion. So we need to look at our resistance minus that judgmental negative tape of our superego. And that really ultimately comes down to a choice to not put judgment on the throne of your consciousness, but to really be curious instead, to let your inquiry into your own resistance be driven by kindness and curiosity. So when we're kind and curious, we can look at anything. We can look at, for example, the common ways that we forget by just automatically identifying with our thoughts. This is something most of us don't see, that often we're just believing our story or believing our thought patterns rather than questioning them. And so one of the ways that you might find very useful is just to see, where am I being obedient to thoughts of fear? Where am I just not stopping to come back into my body, come back to my breath, and be curious when the thoughts of fear arise, when the judgments arise, when the tendency to contract into some mechanism of control arises. So if that seems to be blocking you, you want to curiously and compassionately look at what's holding that in place. Why are you being obedient to such patterns? Or is there something about those tendencies to contract in fear and identify with your fearful thoughts that hasn't been fully seen yet? Because one thing that you can be sure of, and that is that if a pattern is persisting in your life, even after you've seen through it, it doesn't mean that you're a spiritual failure or that you're getting it wrong or you're not trying hard enough. It just means that there's something about that pattern that hasn't been fully seen yet. And so this is where we want to apply our devotion and our dedication, just to get curious. What is this tendency to be unkind to myself? What is this? What's driving it really? Why do I seem to be so attached to this particular stream of thought? For example, that I'm not good enough and I'm not trying harder. So you might find that so much of your resistance has to do with ways in which you're just obeying your superego. You're not dropping that knife of judgment. And so if you see that, if there's any unkindness towards yourself or anyone else, you might want to revisit that chapter 4 and the practices in chapter 4 and see what works for you best about how to drop that self-attack and how to let curiosity and compassion predominate in the way you look more deeply into what it is that might be holding you back. So another thing that I often see with seekers on the path that is a common force of resistance or holding the practice back is the tendency to assume that you can only really be in oneness, or you can really only be kind of deepening on your path spiritually when you're in a good space, where you're always happy and blissful. Well, I want to really debunk that myth for you, in that all human life is going to involve a huge range of experiences. It's going to include sometimes our body not being so strong or well. It's going to include emotions like grief. It's going to include disappointment. It's going to include just moments where it's not so exciting, as well as moments where you're really happy and joyful. And so remembering God, really practicing the oneness, living gracefully, means really being open to all of your experience and not presuming any of it is right or wrong. Just being here with what's so, opening, softening, allowing, and being interested to see what the teaching is that's trying to unfold itself from within your own direct experience. Just opening to the grace that is being offered through your particular set of circumstances and being deepened by it. So you might notice that one of your tendencies of resistance has to do perhaps with procrastination, with not quite getting to your spiritual practice despite your best intentions. Now, I'm not one of those teachers that's insisting that you should spend 2 hours on the meditation cushion each day. I would much rather see you having some more doable spiritual practice that includes some formal moments of sitting in the quiet, or practicing a mantra, or just allowing yourself to be. And I'd rather you do that more regularly rather than to try to set yourself huge goals, but also to remember that catching ourselves in the act and just stopping and practicing letting ourselves be as we are in each moment is extremely important. And so much of the real deepening on our path happens when we catch ourselves in the act of identifying with our emotions or our thoughts, with being obedient to our superego, and actually just relaxing that muscle. It's very much like recognizing, oh, here's what's going on. I'm identifying with that thought pattern. I'm being fearful. I'm getting caught in a habit of judgment about someone. I'm making somebody wrong. I'm saying this shouldn't be. When we catch ourselves in the act and just breathe and sense and allow and do nothing, that is very powerful spiritual practice. And it's what helps us in the moment, as we're in the kitchen, as we're with our family, as we're with our spouse, and we're tempted to just pick up the same old habit again, to just catch yourself in the act and breathe and relax and not make it mean anything at all. Just let go in that moment. The more you practice like that, the more you will find yourself living this, living in the remembrance, becoming more graceful as a human being in your life. So the other thing that you might notice is attachment to a particular position. It's very easy to get attached to a particular position, whether that be to get very attached to a particular spiritual perspective, so much so that we become a little defensive when someone challenges it, or perhaps when we have a view on reality, we've read some books and we might have taken in some teachings that our body isn't real, and therefore when we're sick or not feeling so well, that we must be doing something wrong. So we can very easily, take anything, even truth teachings, and turn them into prison bars. And it's really important that we be aware when we find ourselves getting too militant, attaching to a particular position, and then trying to fit our life into that way of looking at things. So it's really important, even when we notice that we're getting positional, when someone else has a different point of view than we do. And this is an important thing to see, that we need to let those attachments relax, even attachments to what we've come to see is true and is precious to us, to not use it as a weapon against anyone or anything or against life, to remain open. I used to, as many of you know, lead an interfaith seminary. And so some of the times when I would be invited to big interfaith gatherings where there would be people who were very dedicated to their spiritual practice, coming from particular lineages and traditions, but gathering together, I would be very curious that often those environments were some of the most defensive, tense environments that I've walked into. And I think it's because so many people, pretty much everyone in the room, had such deep faith, such deep belief that for them was so sacred and precious. And how fearful we can get when there's someone else around who has an equally deep belief in the center of their heart, but that might have a very different perspective than ours. And so in our world at this time, where there is so much polarity and way too much fear and hatred, it's really important that we really catch ourselves in the act of being positional, of dividing us versus them, even though difference does exist and we need to learn how to navigate it more skillfully, but where we don't create unnecessary borders in our hearts and minds by dividing consciousness up. We remember that even though we might have very different perspectives, points of view, understandings on reality, that we are all part of the one fabric that is God. We are being lived and breathed and moved by the same mystery. And that when we remember the unity of our being and of all being, we can find a place to rest in each moment. We can be with mystery, and we can be open to the intelligence and the wisdom with which to say and do what is healing and helpful, rather than just lock down in our positions, which we all know doesn't help very much. And so one thing that you'll find as you practice all that I'm saying is that your resistance can take many forms in different moments. And we need to just be interested in our resistance and the ways that we seem to be blocking the flow, or the ways in which we seem to be excluding the possibility of the felt sense of grace, which is divine presence, showing itself freshly to us in each moment. So my invitation to you today is to really look very kindly and honestly and more substantially at the ways in which you get lost, in the ways in which you go back to sleep, where you slip into some old pattern or outworn way of being, or you slip back into that familiar pathway of fear or judgment or self-hatred or hatred of another or judgment of another. And instead of judging yourself for this, in fact, I encourage you to refuse to judge yourself for this. Instead, curiously explore what drives this, really. Is it some fear? Is it some concern that if you really relaxed that, if you didn't pick up that habit, what would happen? Usually what we see when we really explore our resistance, our tenaciously kind of locked in positions or habits, what we usually see that's driving them is it's usually some kind of fear. And it's usually the fear that if I didn't judge, if I didn't do that thing, if I didn't try harder, if I didn't contract more, it would usually sort of challenges our ego, like I'd collapse, or it brings a felt sense of it would be untenably vulnerable, or it can bring up a fear that everything I know would just sort of disappear, or often it can bring up fears that if I really let go of that one habit, there's no way I'd have any connection with any member of my family. It would completely break apart. And so what we tend to see as we really explore not only our resistance or those ways in which we keep going back to sleep in that same old way, and what drives it is some fear of loss, some fear that we would lose something, we would lose what we know about who we are, we'd lose something, or we would just disappear. What we think we are, or what we think the world is, might just disappear. And so really, friends, this is where this work is actually taking you, is to learn how to feel that sense of ego dissolving, of ego self, ego structure, ego identity, and even familiar experience of what the world is to really hang out here in that felt sense of feeling that vulnerable and that kind of strange fear that you might just go poof, it might just all disappear. All of everything that I'm teaching you is really about helping you to stay present and tolerate that felt experience of feeling it might all disappear, you might disappear, it might all just be gone. If you can relax there, then there is no barrier whatsoever. Because what happens as you stay present and feel that ego dissolving, then what happens is there's no barrier for the grace of divine presence to take up full residence as you, in you, to live through your body, to speak through your voice, to look through your eyes, for everything that you consider to be yours, just to become God's. This is true surrender. Just relaxing and opening that deeply, that there's no resistance to being lived and breathed by that which has been living you and breathing you all this time anyway. So, my dear friends, I encourage you to just explore this for yourself and to really watch the superego with it, to really refuse to judge yourself for whatever you find, to explore what is it really that's holding me back? What is it really that is causing me to go back to sleep and pick up those old habits? And what's driving that really? And once you've gone deep there and explored in detail those questions, and I really mean in detail, then you might find it useful just to live into this question. What's it like in body, heart, and mind when remembrance is your priority? What's it like in body, heart, and mind when remembrance is your priority? So I hope this is helpful to you. I hope you will listen to this again. And I also want to remind you that there are many little videos you'll find on my website. And there's more than you probably realize if you go to the homepage and you go through all the sliders. And there's also one that you might like called Practicing Ego Relaxation While Watching the News. So please take advantage of the gifts that I've provided there, and may they support you and help you to really live the way of grace in your daily life. Thank you.